Tallboys and Trackmasters is brought to you by Expert Exhaust. Expect more for your money. And by Cycle Mart, your motorcycle parts store. What's going on, everybody? It's Tuesday night, so you know what that means. It's time for Tallboys
and Trackmasters.
What is going on, buddy? It's been a couple weeks.
It's been a little bit. Have not been doing much riding. I did get my bike prepped tonight for probably my last ride, maybe tomorrow, weather depending. It's now not so much an issue with weather, but I don't get home until almost 4, and it's dark at a little bit after 5, which is pretty rough. So
we've been talking about it, man. It's the age of seasonal depression kicking in.
Yeah, I can trade in my regular everyday depression for seasonal.
That's right. The time change is brutal.
It's rough. Yeah,
we got to go out for a ride this past weekend. Tom King put together.
And let's hear about that one.
It was a good time. You know, we pretty much just ran the easy loop from the 304 detour earlier this year. Once we did get to Parsons, about half of us needed to get back to Fairmont, myself included. So we kind of just hopped on that Smoky Hollow road and started beating feet back to Fairmont. But in those valleys and stuff coming back home, and like even talking about coming through like Arden and Pleasant Creek and stuff, you know, it's only 5 o'clock and it's pitch dark in those valleys. You can't see anything. So the deer were horrible too coming back. Suicidal varmints coming out in front of you.
I've seen a massive uptick in the number of dead deer on my commute probably the last 2-3 weeks. So must be either close to rut or, you know, in the middle of it. So
yep, we're getting right into that season, man. And you know, with that being said, it's the time of stripping down bikes. It's the time of, you know, catching up on stuff around your house, probably if you're like me and been neglecting that type of stuff. But it's also the time of the year where you start maybe planning out your next riding outfit, your next bikes you might like to try to ride. So, you know, with that being said, man, here lately it seems like, you know, you do have a lot of trade shows and things of that sort coming out. So it's a chance for a lot of these brands to come out with new models or updated revised versions of their previous models.
You get the bold new graphics.
Well, that's the thing. It's not just bold new graphics anymore. It seems it's brand new bikes coming out of left field.
There's a lot going on in the industry.
It really is. You know, we kind of went over some of this stuff in one of our first episodes, but it's changed so much since that first episode that it's time to kind of circle back and start talking about some of these new models that came out. And
I agree.
You have everything from, like I said, new models coming out of left field from manufacturers that really aren't known for, you know, spending that R&D money to come up with new stuff, and you know,
like Suzuki coming out with the 800 out of nowhere.
Yep, and that's one we're gonna touch on here in a little bit. You have models that are, you know, pretty successful in their own right, but their customer base is saying, hey, we'd like you to revise this or change this or do this. And, you know, Royal Enfield coming out with their new 450 Himalayan kind of checks all the boxes for the guys that have the old model out, and really kind of revamps that whole bike and makes it better. And from all the spec sheet things we can see and videos we can talk about, that it definitely looks like it's a vast improvement over the old.
I'm excited to talk about the Himalayan, and that's something that, I really get excited for anything that's not Japanese or Euro. So
yeah, let's start with that. Then we'll kind of, I don't really want to say circumvent the globe, but we'll start with the Japanese out, and we kind of mentioned it earlier there, and that new V-Strom 800 just kind of came out of left field. I mean,
yeah,
you look at Suzuki, and they're in the off-road world anyway. It seems like, don't upset the apple cart.
Yeah, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Our DRZ 400 is sold like hotcakes for a million years. The DR 650 is sold well for years. We're kind of grandfathered into all of these emission laws and stuff coming out now. So it's not broke, don't fix it. And we're still making bukus of money. I mean, if you look at their motocross models like the RMZ 450, it's been the same bike since 2012, which, I mean, they've kind of got left in the dust when it comes to a competitiveness standpoint from that regard. But
yep, agreed.
I don't think anybody really saw the new 800 V-Strom coming. And kudos to Suzuki for kind of kicking that off and really updating a very well versed and very well respected and liked model in the previous V-Strom 650 and 1000s, and really, kind of kicking the door down and coming into that growing middleweight adventure bike segment.
Yeah, they're definitely catering more towards the off-road side of adventure bike. It's got reasonable suspension from Showa. Chances of being undersprung are going to be pretty high, but at least you're starting with a decent setup. Of course, the styling and everything's pretty aggressive too. It's got the classic beak, the BMW GS signature. So
yeah, and it's definitely a step above the previous V-Strom models, which
yep.
were honestly, Suzuki SV650 and SV1000 kind of naked touring bikes that had just slightly better suspension, which wasn't saying a whole lot. But, guys have taken those old V-Stroms around the world and done any kind of adventure riding you could think of. And, going to a parallel twin 800 now. So I don't know if you really call it a V-Strom now. Is it a P-Strom? I'm not sure.
A P-Strom? You might want to get that checked out. I think they make pills for that now.
So I'm not sure about that, but all reports and all videos that I've seen about that bike, wasn't really expecting it, and it's a nice surprise. It's a nice addition to that lineup of, we kind of keep harping back to it, but the Tenere 700 kind of started that middleweight adventure bike class, in the United States anyway, and that's the one frustrating part is you see that segment explode here in North America. But the bad part is it's been around and it never really went anywhere since the late 80s over in Europe and Australia, with multiple different kind of middleweight adventure bikes that were very capable in their own right. And we're just kind of now seeing that in the United States. It's the classic case of everybody overseas gets the cool stuff and we don't get anything nice over here in America.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. As a Toyota fan, don't get me started on that, please. But yeah, it looks really interesting. The claimed wet weight is, I think, about 505 pounds, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So definitely heavier than a Tenere.
Yeah.
But it's a bike built for a different purpose. I think that's something that people get hung up on a lot when, these new models come out. It's like every mid-sized truck that comes out has to be purported to be the Tacoma killer, even though it might be something that's for a completely different demographic. I see that a lot on like Adventure Rider and stuff like that too. Every sub 1000 cc adventure bike that hits the market has to be compared to the Tenere, despite the fact that they are different bikes built for different purposes.
Exactly. Yeah, I could definitely see that new 800. It's just a step up from the old V-Strom. It's got better brakes, better suspension, more power, more creature comforts, more tech, and
which is good and bad.
Yeah, it's good and bad. And it's a sharp looking bike. I would say out of all of the new like middleweight adventure bikes, that's probably the best looking one in my opinion. I really do like the way that thing kind of sets and looks.
It's got really good lines. They, like I said, they definitely channeled the overall silhouette of a BMW GS. You've got like kind of the buffalo look, like the big hump, the relatively flat back, and yeah, from a side profile, it looks really sweet. I'd be very interested to throw a leg over one because that would be great for 2-up riding or something like that.
Absolutely. A lot of the videos and articles I've read about it said that bike has a very awesome mid range where it just kind of comes alive and keeps on pulling. And you always hear guys talk about that no word, at least in my eyes, when it comes to power delivery, where they say linear, which in a way is a nice way of saying that it's kind of a dog. But they say that thing really kind of comes alive in the mid range and pulls very nicely.
Nice.
I don't know. I can't really think of anything else right now that Suzuki has other than that 800. I think they have like a 1050 XT or something too. That's still it's a little bit bigger, but I think
we're living in the middle of the middleweight adventure bike wars right now. Whether most people notice it or not, the sheer amount of models that have hit the market from almost all manufacturers at this point is pretty staggering. So I guess that'd be a good segue into talking more about the new Honda Transalp.
Yeah.
So I don't know where that fits in terms of like off-road oriented bikes and road oriented bikes. I could see it filling kind of the same role that the original Transalp did, where it really wasn't meant more for dirt or more for street. It was meant to do kind of an even mix of both.
I'm kind of the mindset that, I mean, obviously there's a market for that bike or they wouldn't have made it. And you can see that people have already started snatching them up. But I kind of feel like that bike's going to suffer from an identity crisis a little bit.
I think so too. It's going to be constantly living in the shadow of the Africa Twin because the Africa Twin's been on the market in its current form for quite a long time at this point.
Yeah, it's not really a full street oriented middleweight adventure bike. I mean, I would say that it kind of leans that way.
Yeah, I think so too.
But you have all the negatives if you're kind of leaning that way. A 21-inch front wheel, it's not wanting to turn in as quickly as like a sport tourer would. And then we got to talk about that ground clearance on that thing because I've never seen a bike that says, hey, we can go off road on this, have an oil sump that hangs down, an exhaust that hangs down super low. And I was watching, I think it was Dork in the Road, his YouTube channel with his bike. I know him and that Ian from Big Rock Moto both kind of bought those bikes at the same time. I can't remember the name of the company that makes the skid plate, which it protects all that stuff, but it also makes your ground clearance even like an inch worse than it was. I mean, it literally looks like if you try to ride over a curb, you're going to get hung up on that thing.
That is probably my single biggest gripe with this middleweight adventure bike segment is I understand the exhaust has to go somewhere. I understand that due to the sheer size of the engines of these things, you can't just route it through around the inside of the frame, like on most Japanese and Euro dual sports. But it just really sucks to have this big 2-inch or greater diameter exhaust that's ideally the lowest point of your bike, except in the Transalp's position. It's got some kind of lowered sump or something on the left side of the motor if you're looking forward. This is a recipe for disaster. You talked Ian from Big Rock Moto. He had a KTM, like the 890 Adventure or something like that, with a factory skid plate that realistically is more for deflecting like small gravel and stuff like that. Did something that I've done, several times, kicked up a big rock with the front tire and it smashed the skid plate in and actually cracked the sump. Luckily, you don't have to split the cases to replace a sump on that model KTM. Hopefully the Honda would be the same way, but I could see that being a day ruiner pretty easy. Let's face it, you get a heavy bike, you get an 1/8 inch skid plate or something like that, because most of the ones for adventure bikes just aren't that thick compared to enduro models. You can easily get enough deflection out of that piece of aluminum to, it won't puncture it, but it's still going to come up. It's going to press that skid plate up and smack that sump. And that could easily be a day ruiner.
Yeah, like we were saying too, Honda already has the CB500X, which kind of fits that role of a more street oriented tour bike that a lot of guys take off road. I mean, let's be honest, Rally Raid product has multiple suspension packages, skid plates, wheel sets out there to make that CB500X into a true off road machine. And then, obviously Honda doesn't want to take away sales from that bike. They don't want to take away sales from the Africa Twin. So what is that? What is the Transalp? It's just kind of out there in limbo in my eyes. I mean, obviously, like we keep harping on, that middleweight adventure bike segment just continues to explode. And it's always nice to have more options and models in that class. But, a lot of things that I've seen and read about, that 750 engine, it doesn't have a whole lot of low end torque. It likes to be revved high. We're talking 95 horsepower with the US version and over 100 on the European models. So everything I've seen is like, it's an exciting motor. It likes to rev high, but it doesn't like to be lugged very low, which is going to definitely affect your off-road ability on that bike.
It's kind of a tale as old as time. Anytime you take an engine that was designed for street use and then turn around and decide you're going to put it in a more off-road oriented chassis, you always end up with stuff like that. Originally when that would have been designed, that sump was fine. Realistically, you're never going to go over anything like that with a street oriented bike where a low hanging sump's going to be a problem. But you start combining that with, the whole image that this is going to be an off-road capable machine, that low-hanging sump, it really just starts to become an issue. I think your point about the CB500 is really true. This bike kind of doesn't have a home in the... I'm sure it does for some people because they're buying it, right?
Yeah.
But you have the milder end of the CB500 and the wilder end of the Africa Twin. Like if you're going to do a lot more touring or multi-day adventure rides where you're going to want that additional highway capability and everything, or maybe you just like bigger bikes,
Well, yeah, not only that, like the Africa Twin has way better suspension.
Oh yeah, that's a no-brainer.
The 750 does.
Yep.
In my eyes, and it seems like Honda has done this a lot lately with all of their kind of dual sport and adventure bike models. If you go down the list, like, the CRF 450L, well, it's Honda's answer to the Euro, dual sport hardcore side of things, but it has issues. You need to have a pipe and a programmer basically to ride the thing because the fuel mapping is horrible.
Yep.
So it's almost there, but not quite.
Yep.
The CRF 300 rallies and the 300Ls, we've harped on this before. It's a great entry level bike, but the suspension's horrible on the thing.
Yes.
You got to spend lots of money to make the suspension work right. I mean, otherwise it'd be a great bike. And I kind of feel like this Transalp is going to continue that same story with, what kind of is this bike? But if you do want to go off road, well, we've got a oil pan sticking down 1.5 miles and exhaust sticking down obviously there's aftermarket companies out there that have remedied those issues for Honda. You look at Yoshimura with the pipes for the CRF 450, the Vortex ECUs, Rally Raid with the 500X, kind of making it more off-road friendly. But at the end of the day, if I am a diehard Honda guy and I want an adventure touring bike that has some off-road capability, I'm going to buy the Africa Twin. I'm going to buy the bike that I know is well proven. There's multiple different aftermarket options out there for the thing, and it's a lot more proven, and it feels like it was designed for that purpose, not that it was a street bike engine thrown into a off-road chassis that what's it for? I don't know. I'm not a fan.
Or if I want a big bore thumper, more off-road oriented, Honda still makes the XR650L. I mean, we talked about that as being one of the most prolific big bore thumpers that was ever produced. still make it. It's still got, same bike that it's been since the 90s, except now it's white with bold new graphics, et cetera, et cetera. So, things have kind of started to get turned on their head. For the longest time, it felt like these manufacturers' product lines were shrinking year by year. And in the last year or so, or 2 years maybe, things have really started to go the opposite direction, that it almost makes you wonder, who's gauging the market for this stuff? Who is deciding, okay, say we're going to take a 750 Transalp, what niche in the market is that going to fill?
Yeah. The one thing I will give Honda props for is, they didn't really drag their feet when it came to that bike. You started hearing some rumblings about it online and at different trade shows and stuff. And it was like, it seemed to me, at least, like within 2 weeks, the bike was out at trade shows and then it was on the dealership floor. It wasn't a dragged out process where you keep hearing, oh, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And 4 or 5 years later, you finally get the bike on the showroom floor. I mean, props for them. It was like, hey, we're making this. Here's a sampling of it. Bam, it's at your dealership now.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I first saw it on Adventure Rider, however long ago, in some forum post or whatever. And it wasn't 2 weeks later that I saw the first teaser video from Honda.
Yeah.
So, which is very surprising because Japanese manufacturers traditionally are very slow to innovate because their entire brand is built around, reliability. And if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how, like, it seems anymore that every single one of these teaser videos that comes out, they're all the same. It's quick shots in the desert at dusk, and they have hay bales on fire that spread out whatever the name of the bike is, and it's the same jumps and the same fishtailing. Like, I think whoever the video marketing director guy is, he just does one video for every different brand, and they just follow the same script.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of as an aside, it is connected to what you said, but kind of as an aside, things have shifted towards like Jeep style marketing for bikes. They're selling an image of, you're going to be some rugged lone wolf adventurer out on this thing, crossing desolate, reaches of land and everything. It's the same marketing. They're trying to sell you a lifestyle or a vision of what you could do with it, when in reality,
you're going to ride it to work and back.
You probably ride it to work and back. If you're one of the cool kids, you come out and ride with us and all that. But I have noticed that things have gotten a lot further away from, here's what sets us apart from our competitors, to this is how cool you'll look after you spend $14,000. That's kind of the thing, the trend now.
Yeah. Let's transition a little bit. I don't really think there's a whole lot of other Japanese adventure dual sport models coming out. I have heard some rumblings of a new 500 Versus from Kawasaki, but nothing concrete on that yet. And I think we really need to touch on this, and we have a little bit in the past, but I think we could kind of just put a bow and wrap this up completely. And I mean, this market is being invaded by China. It really is. I really feel, and I really hope that this is the case, that you're seeing the Chinese kind of do what the Japanese did back in the 70s. They're coming onto the scene. Sure, some of the stuff isn't really completely up to snuff yet, but the ideas are there. The tooling is there. The thought processes and the distribution networks probably aren't quite there yet as they were for the 70s Japanese bikes. But I mean, there is an absolute flood of the market of the Chinese bikes. I think the one thing that people kind of forget is damn near every manufacturer these days uses some type of Chinese manufacturing plant to make parts for their bikes. It's just the way of the world these days. I mean, everything's made in China. Well, what you have is these corporations, these big time name companies, KTM, Yamaha, just partnered up with CF Moto, who we'll touch on here shortly. They partner with these guys to make engines, make parts for them. But part of that contract is, we'll make your engines, your hard parts for you, sure. But if you want us to do that, you have to let us use that intelligence and that property to make our own bike
Yep. So
for our own market, and then it ends up getting sent out all over all over the country, or all over the world. Excuse me.
Yep. They rely heavily on IP theft. That is all there is to it. So I had read, I don't know if it's really an expose, but it was an article about someone who at one point had worked with one of the major motorcycle manufacturers, with a joint venture with maybe Zongshin or one of the more well-known Chinese engine manufacturers. Stated essentially whatever designs they offered up for the joint venture was seen as some form of collateral. They knew it was going to be copied, stolen, etc. That's why they took steps to not share the latest and greatest. Like if you've got some design tweaks that take it from 50 horsepower to 75 and by cam profiles and things like that, lightweighting, it'd be in your best interest to not share that with someone who is going to be your competitor. So that leads to a lot of what they're producing being kind of detuned versions of Japanese or Euro engines. So I thought that was an interesting concept. Something we've touched on before. We both deal in industries where precision machining is kind of a commonplace thing. I can take a drawing for a part that cost $2,000 or something like that and turn it into something that costs $800 by relaxing enough tolerances on it. So that's one of the big things for all these Chinese manufacturers is what amount of tolerance or what level of tolerance are they subjecting their supply chain, like all their individual components and everything to.
I've definitely had my share of Chinese motorcycle experience. I bought the GPX 450. I had an SSR 450. So, I've been around the block a little bit when it comes to these type of motorcycles, and you're exactly right. What you're going to find is the bearing tolerances aren't the best. The plastic is garbage and junk on the thing.
That's something else I want to talk about too or I'll let you finish, but we'll touch on plastics.
So I'm of the mindset that if you're dead set on buying a Chinese motorcycle, there's a lot of geopolitical issues when you think about that, which honestly slave labor is what's making these motorcycles at the end of the day, which is something to think about. We're constantly competing with China in all kinds of different aspects. So, I mean, honestly, you're funding the enemy, so to speak. But there's something to be said to me about a Chinese manufacturer that maybe just straight up 100% copies another motorcycle. Because if you're going to buy that bike and you need parts, well, at the end of the day, you can probably buy just whatever the Japanese bike they replaced that parts was. That's how it was with that SSR 450 that I had. I mean, honestly, it was a good trail bike. It wasn't a race bike. It wasn't really a good dual sport, but it was a fun little play trail bike. And every time anything broke on it, I just upgraded it with a CRF 450X part that it was copying.
Unfortunately, we're starting to depart from that, and that's where things start to worry me.
Exactly. With the GPX, look at that entire line. You have, an engine that's proprietary, sort of, in a chassis that's copied. So there's certain parts of that bike that you could get quickly in a pinch if it were to break, but if you have problems with the fuel injection like I have, you have problems with the engine like I have, you're relying on the distribution network, which a lot of times is some guy's warehouse on the West Coast that he's just getting things drop shipped to, months ahead of time. And you're just waiting on Chinese manufacturing to catch up with those extra parts. So it's a give and take in my eyes. And I will say that there's so many better models coming out now that it seems like maybe they're starting to turn the corner a little bit and get into the realm of being a serious competitor.
Yeah, I agree. I used to be of the mindset that this kind of just applies to the EXC range of KTMs, that they were overpriced. Then I came to own one, and I started, getting more familiar with, well, here's the cost of these OEM parts. And I was thinking, it's going to break the bank. It's really surprisingly affordable. And being in an industry where precision machining and like manufacturing is pretty ingrained into it, I can kind of stick my thumb in the wind or whatever and gauge like, okay, that's a reasonable cost for that part. So you start taking a part that say costs $20 for KTM, and now you have a Chinese manufacturer producing it for $10. You're out of your mind if you think there hasn't been some amount of corners cut to get between points A and B.
Yeah.
It might not be metallurgy, but it probably is. The machining processes themselves are still probably carried out very similarly, but what it really is a cost adder for manufacturing is quality control.
Yeah.
So quality control, when you're assembling everything in a factory, you can blueprint things. It's essentially like making a watch. You have a tray of your individual gears, you're figuring out what fits together best, et cetera, et cetera. And then the time comes that you need to replace something, and whatever you get from the factory wasn't blueprinted for your engine. It fits whatever spec they built it to, but the tolerances are off enough that it causes problems. That's something that concerns me with Chinese manufactured bikes.
One thing you said there, and we've talked about off air too. You're talking about blueprinting, and I think that if you look up all these YouTube review videos of these motorcycles, especially the new Cove 450 Rally,
Yep.
You have to take that with a grain of salt, because, like we talked about off air, I think you are correct that a lot of times these influencers and YouTube guys, they're sent a bike that is 1000% blueprinted, and all the best quality components are put on that bike for them to test.
Yep.
And I feel like sometimes that gets lost in the way a little bit, where, maybe, Tyler from Everride's Cove 450 Rally is a great bike.
Yep.
But, Joe Schmo out here on the East Coast that orders one, I don't think he's going to get the same components and the same quality control as what that guy did. Because why? Well, that dude has, over 1 million YouTube followers, and he's a brand ambassador.
And he's well known.
And he's well known.
Very well known in the industry.
You see those guys, like it's him, and there's another guy, Elcar's ADV.
Yep. Elcar's has been huge on GPX stuff for years at this point too.
So I have a bad feeling that those guys are sent the very top of the line quality stuff, while guys like me that order the stuff, it's not really the case.
I'll tell you, I watch a guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he runs a little mechanic shop, got 2 Cove 450 rallies, and we'll go into the Cove itself, in a little bit. One, all the plastics match. They were all the same shade of white, which is what you expect, because let's face it, this Cove 450 Rally isn't cheap. It's cheap for a comparable bike. What it would take to get the same bike from KTM is cheap, but you're not spending $6,000 on a new bike like when the GPX first launched or whatever.
Yeah.
The second bike he got, once like the front half of the plastics were white and the back half were some weird off tan color, like it was immediately apparent. That to me, I would be disgusted with that bike from the get-go, because you couldn't even get the plastics to match in shade. I would constantly questioning what other things did you overlook. I'll kind of go into it too. I think some manufacturers are starting to take like the Kia Motors approach. Kia not necessarily making reliable vehicles, but they make vehicles with things that people want, like touch screens, interiors that feel more expensive than they are, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that these manufacturers are getting wise to what these reviewers pinpoint in videos and reflecting that on their model updates and things like that, but not necessarily to the point where it's like a design refresh or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, like I said, you have to be careful, because it's one thing to completely copy a bike where, hey, I can get parts for this thing. I'll just order them for the bike that they're copying. But when the Chinese come out with their own proprietary stuff, you really have to watch, because, we both know the distribution network's not there. The aftermarket support's not there. And let me just put it to you this way. My GPX 450 that I bought, I had issues with it, but I went into it expecting to have issues with it because it was under $5,000 for a 450 fuel injected street legal motorcycle.
And you can let stuff slide for that price.
Exactly. I knew that any chassis part that I was going to need, I could get for a Husky and be able to be okay. When I started having issues with the fuel injection and the different stuff with the engine, I had to wait a while for replacement parts from GPX. I have my gripes and complaints with them just from a customer service standpoint, where they kind of went out of their way to screw me, I feel, on a different engine. Now, was I abusing that motorcycle for its design purposes? I'll be 100% honest and say yes. I was trying to.
You're James Wright. That's a no-brainer.
That's right. I was racing, local hair scramble races. That bike, that thing was never designed to compete in a closed course competition off road. Was it a good dual sport? Yeah, I feel like it was an okay dual sport. It did its job, and I was comfortable on it. I didn't really have any gripes or complaints in that aspect. But they started building upon their little bit of success that they had and just started jacking the price up. And I feel like they've completely priced themselves out of the market. Why would I want to spend the same money as I could on a slightly used, well-known motorcycle for, the nuances that's going to come with owning a Chinese motorcycle?
I'm a big fan of established brands. Kawasaki will be there tomorrow morning. KTM will be there tomorrow morning. Maybe not Husky. Maybe they get sold off again for the third time in 20 years. But, I can go to Morgantown Power Sports and get what I need tomorrow. I can do the same thing, run down to Leeson's from a Kawasaki. We're not there yet with Chinese bikes. And I don't foresee us in an age where brick and mortar stores are, gradually starting to fade as more and more people relying on, internet-based ordering. I don't foresee any of these Chinese brands ever rising to the level of dealership support that, we've gotten used to with Japanese and Euro bikes.
It's not going to be there. That's the thing, like with the GPX brand, and even the Cove brand, basically, that's not a brand. That's not the manufacturer's brand. Yep. What people don't realize is if you're an importer for them, they'll put whatever company brand name you want on the side of the bike as long as you order enough for them. It's one factory making bikes for everybody.
It's like you get on Amazon and try to look for camping gear, and it's the exact same piece of gear with 20 ridiculous names that are mostly consonants.
Yep.
It's kind of the same principle.
Yep. It's the same thing. Just speaking on the Cove itself, because we're starting to run into some time here. It's a good idea, good concept. You got a single cylinder rally bike. Lots of people want that type of bike, myself included. I like to have a rally kit for my 500 EXC. I think it looks good, offers you a little bit more wind protection, and it kind of transforms a kind of single track, slayer into something that may be a little bit more comfortable to do on the highway to get to those different places. But like you said, I just think that at the end of the day, it's overpriced. The fit and finish isn't there, and the parts and distribution network is not there for that bike. So I would caution that. And I mean, if you look on Marketplace, a lot of times it's kind of strange that if you look up a GPX on Marketplace, what do you see? You see bikes that have like less than 200 miles for sale. There's a lot of dealer or buyer remorse there. They buy the bike, they realize it's not what they wanted, it's not good enough for their intended purpose, and it ends up back on the used market for sale.
It's as simple as, you get it and the fueling's not right. Okay, well, if nobody makes a fuel tuner and nobody local to you has the capability to reflash the ECU, I mean, what do you do at that point?
Yep.
It's that straightforward. And I've seen some very, very blue header pipes off the Cove 450s, which is a little bit concerning.
Pretty much every Chinese motorcycle that you can buy today that is fuel injected, which it's a big moniker for them to release. It's got Delphi fuel injection or Bosch fuel injection.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. It still runs lean. It still has a lot of issues. And yeah, like I said, I see the appeal of the Cove, but I mean, at the end of the day, I've been burned too many times by that company because it's GPX and it's an importer. And like I said, it doesn't really resemble or a copy any other type of bike. It's its own kind of proprietary thing. So
yeah,
you're going to have issues there.
From a standpoint of handling, I've heard good feedback about it.
Yeah, I say suspension's good, and but everything else I've read about the engine, the fueling, it's chunky, it runs lean, it doesn't like to lug down low, it likes to be revved to the moon. I mean, that's typical, exactly what my 450 GPX was like as well.
Yep.
The other kind of big name player in the Chinese market has to be CF Moto, who is honestly not a bad company. They've been around for a long time, making pit bikes, making kind of knockoff four-wheelers and side-by-sides, which guys have had very good success with.
Mm-hmm.
I know it was actually Heather's old boss, Justin Wood. He took part in a team effort with CF Moto on one of their 800 utility quads and raced the Vegas to Reno desert race.
Oh, wow.
They ended up finishing second in that and in the vet class. So, I mean, honestly, it's one of those deals where you have a big company like that where they're making multiple engines and different products for every other bike manufacturer you can think of. I mean, to me, that kind of lets you maybe keep the blinders on a little bit and give them more of a chance. And, CF Moto actually does have a pretty decent dealer network here in the United States. One of their bikes that's out now is that new the 800 Adventure, which is a KTM 790 engine, and in their own kind of proprietary chassis. But you still kind of get to the bad part of Chinese adventure bikes and dual sports, which is, sure, the engine and some of the components might be the same as a different bike, but the other stuff is proprietary. It's hard to find, and it's heavy. Man, those Chinese bikes are heavy. It's like they have to use twice the wall thickness of different structural components to get the same quality, and the things end up heavy as hell.
Yep. And then additionally, even something as simple as, having to buy bearings or fork seals, I can very readily get those for any of my bikes as I need them.
Yeah.
Because they're all KYB, Showa,
Yep.
Explore, something like that for suspension, for instance. You start to get knockoff suspension that is like a knockoff of Showa, I think, is what the Cove is utilizing.
Fast Ace is what it's called.
You don't know if for some reason they changed the fitment or anything for the fork seals to utilize something that was cheaper. If they decided, okay, well, we're going to make a Showa knockoff, but we've got a ton of Kayaba knockoff fork seals. We'll just, modify the bore and the lands and everything and run it with that.
Yeah, if you're one of the first guys to buy that bike, you really have to be a guinea pig and be willing to do your due diligence and research and figure out what fits, what did they copy, which is why I don't think I would ever buy a first-year Chinese motorcycle. Let that thing come out for a few years, buy it secondhand off the used market, because at that point, guys will probably have figured out what they copied to make it work right and what you can order to get it.
Yep.
The CF Moto 800, I've seen some review stuff on it. Engine is pretty much the same as a KTM 790. It's way heavier. They say it's a pretty decent bike, but I know some of the touchscreen TFT stuff is a little chunky, and it's hard to get into and navigate.
Yeah, I don't want anything to do with a touchscreen on a bike, period.
Yeah.
CF Moto's also got that 450 twin cylinder that I'd actually like to try out, because that thing's probably a screamer.
Yeah, it's the same engine as their 450 RS, kind of naked sport bike, and it has really good reviews. So that's a great engine. Just kind of has the same thing as a Chinese. All the other Chinese bikes have. Where's the dealer network? Where's the distribution network?
Yep.
I would give that thing a try. I'd like to let's kind of move on a little quickly here now, because there's one bike that I do want to talk about.
Yeah, same.
Again, if you kind of circle back around a little bit to the Euro side of things. Gas has the new 700 ES coming out.
Sherco's got the 500 dual sport,
Yep.
which I think they produce a small enough volume of bikes that they are kind of in the same realm as Beta, where they're not stuck meeting EPA regulations as strict as most other manufacturers. So you end up with a bike from the factory that's already been detuned effectively.
Yep.
Or not detuned, I'm sorry, desmogged effectively.
Yep.
Yeah.
I watched a ride video with Cooper Webb, who's a sponsored rider for Sherco, throwing that 500 dual sport around, and he was grinning ear to ear. And when he came back to the pits there, he's like, there's a couple rounds of the Enduro Cross where I want to ride this thing. I like this 500 engine. And he said, I can do everything that I do on my hard Enduro bikes on this thing. So that's encouraging to see. I would love to give one of those Shercos a try. Obviously Gas also has a 500 and a 350 coming out, which is just red versions of the KTM 350s and 500s. But, in a way, the market is in such demand for the 350, the 500, and the 700, 690, 701 that I don't think it's a bad thing to have another manufacturer building those bikes because they're available if you really want them.
I agree. It's a big availability thing in this day and age. It seems like a lot of bikes are just hard to get a hold of.
Yep. Anything.
So more, you can't get a hold of the orange KTM for 6 months, but you can get the red one 2 weeks from now.
That's, and Gas kind of prides itself on being the cheaper of the three options. So
which that price gap closes every single year. That used to be significant difference, and it's not quite the same now. But
one of the last bikes that I know we definitely both want to talk about is one where it's an instance of, a manufacturer coming out with a product that's successful. Lots of people buy the thing. And then they also listen to their customer base when they come out with their new model. And that's Royal Enfield. The new Himalayan, what do they call it? The 452, I think. Really started hearing rumblings that Royal Enfield was going to come out with a new Himalayan and kind of not rest on their laurels, so to speak, and listen to the customer base saying, hey, we'd like a bike with a 6 gear. We need some more power, need a little bit more suspension travel. And I mean, all in all, everything that I've seen about that bike, it definitely raises some eyebrows and makes me want to throw a leg over it and give it a ride.
I don't get excited, like I said, for a lot outside the realm of Japanese and Euro bikes, but I'm actually genuinely excited at what Royal Enfield's put together. We'll just kind of put like their past quality or whatever aside and just look at this objectively of, it's occupying a space between middleweight adventure bike and dual sport, which is great. We've gone from an air-cooled 411cc engine that made about as much horsepower as my KLX 250 to a more modernized water-cooled 450 with a 6th gear. They've changed the chassis. The engine is now a stressed member of the frame, same way as in the Tenere. One of the biggest takeaways for me is they didn't just copy or make their own version of some suspension. They put show on it. So they just went to a manufacturer that already knows the ins and outs of producing forks and rear shock. And, that alone makes me feel a lot better about it, that they didn't just decide they were going to try some in-house, homologation or whatever they could get a hold of to try to make it work. So I'm actually really excited, and hopefully at some point get a try one out.
Yeah, they still kind of kept that old school awesome scrambler-esque motif on the thing too. It looks like it's a great looking bike. I really do like the old Enfields the way they look too.
In this day and age, when every bike feels like it is something out of a sci-fi film or something. Like I really don't care for KTM styling across any of their bikes, but it's more of a form or a function over form kind of deal. They did a really good job at keeping the retro looks on the Himalayan while still making it look modern.
Yeah, the one that I think I saw the video of Itchy Boots riding, it was like a kind of a digital camo-esque looking paint job on the thing. Really awesome looking bike. And how about that speedo and GPS combination there? I really do dig that thing. If you guys haven't seen that, make sure you look up that thing on that bike.
It's interesting.
Very interesting. It looks old school, like a round old school 70s, 80s gauge. But it's fully digital with the speedo, the RPM, and they encompass the GPS right in the speedometer, which is really cool. It kind of blew my mind when I first saw that.
So I thought it was interesting too. They went full LED, which is something that, you know, we've been waiting for Honda to do with their US based bikes for eternity at this point.
Yeah.
Another thing that they did was they made sweeping changes. It's virtually a complete redesign of the bike compared to the previous generation. They made it lighter.
Yeah.
They didn't make it heavier. They did what Kawasaki couldn't. They made improvements, and it didn't end up weighing 40 pounds more than the generation before it, which that's something that gets complained about a lot, is just the sheer weight of some of these bikes. So it's, I think, sub 400 and it says here 432 pounds with fuel.
Yep.
That's pretty compelling option for the segment.
I really think that the new Royal Enfield is kind of going after that KLR market.
I think so.
You have a bike that's capable of doing some pretty long distance sport touring. It's easy to get on and off. It's very beginner friendly.
Yep.
There's some tech there. A great looking bike. And I think it will kind of come over after a little bit of the KLR market.
I think so too. They've gone to, you know, dual overhead cam, shim over bucket, which is the same as like KTM 350 or something like that. Time will tell as far as reliability is concerned. That's why I said, for the sake of conversation, we'll just set all their previous stuff aside and assume that the bike's reliable.
Yeah. Everything I can look at too about the engine, it doesn't look like it's some Chinese made copy of something else. It really does look like it's Royal Enfield's own design.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest takeaways for me, is, you know, actually being able to watch some content from the engineering team in India that put this together. I mean, yeah, it's halfway around the world, but it's still just cool to see innovation happening, even though it's a company playing catch up. You know, we've had air cooled or water cooled thumpers for, I think the KLR came around in the late 80s.
Yeah.
I was very, very surprised they didn't just go to Zhongshin or one of the other more well-known Chinese engine manufacturers and just contract them to produce a knockoff CRF 450 motor for this bike.
Yeah. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's anything else out there right now that, you know, I know Ducati just came out with the most powerful single cylinder engine known to man at this point for one of their, what looks like a hyper motard bike that's coming out.
Not only the horsepower, I think it's about 85, 90 horsepower, revs up to 10,250 RPM from a 659 cc motor. So
and it comes, they say that the bike that it comes in is going to come with a free loaf of gabagool.
It better come with a free set of doe eyes and an unbuttoned shirt to get out of some speeding tickets you're going to find yourself in.
It's very true. You know, the thing about this whole thing tonight is this is a fluid type of deal, man. There's other models that are coming out, other models being rumored, and it's a real super exciting time, I think, in the industry, because
I think so too.
It just, the options are endless. Seems like manufacturers are listening to their customer bases and coming out with different stuff, and it's exciting.
Yep, I agree. And an industry that really for the last several years has just been in a state of stagnation is definitely exciting. Hopefully the next several years continue the trend until the EPA drops the hammer, and then everything goes from this broad sweeping, you know, array of choices, and we all get funneled into electric bikes.
It's exciting to me to see, you know, out of all the stuff that's coming out, what's going to be the new bike that hits the nail on the head in the market and continues starts a legacy that continues for a long time.
I've wondered that too. What's going to be the next DR650, the next XR650L, the next KLR650? What is going to be the next ubiquitous dual sport or adventure machine?
Yep. All right, well, let's go through some of the comments here before we get into our favorite part of the show with Had to Lay Her Down. Dan Farnsworth says the XR650L is still a good do-it-all bike. I agree with Trevor. That is still a nice bike. Yep. Agree with that too, Dan. Lisa, dragged out processes, Triumph dirt bikes.
We don't have enough time to get into that one. That's been ridiculous.
My God, I've never seen a production team release a video because they want to talk about the way the engine looks.
Yeah, me too. Or just pat themselves on the back, which it is an accomplishment. Don't get me wrong, but tell me some specs.
Yep. She also says KTM still overpriced for their quality, but people in that market will pay that premium just like mountain bike people will. Still better than any Chinese brand. Yep. And the last thing she also says, one of the only segments of the motorcycle industry that's growing is the ADV market. Cruiser sport bikes are sputtering out. And that's definitely true. It seems like people are figuring out that you don't have to set all day on a super heavy, horribly suspended cruiser bike to ride around and have a good time when you can buy an adventure bike and be more comfortable in the street and have the capability to go see and do a lot more stuff off-road.
Yep, I agree. Harley Davidson's largely responsible for their own up-and-coming demise for their refusal or inability, I don't know which it is, to embrace younger riders.
Yep. Unfortunately,
their fan base is like really old school.
Brother
Harley, as shown with the Pan America, Harley can produce modernized motorcycles. Unfortunately, their fan base just wants a machine that turns gasoline into vibrations and noise. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it.
You're right, man. I agree with that.
2024 with push rods. I don't know.
Oh yeah. It's like I got almost 2,000 cc's on this hog with 43 horsepower.
Yep.
Well, speaking of our brothers and Clibben people, let's get on with our next our favorite segment. Had to lay her down.
Did you run into some Clibbens? Did Barb take the kids? Well, Hoss, maybe you had to lay her down.
Love it. Well, so our clip tonight is a Clibben that we're going to have to really start to get used to these days, and that's fur Clibbens. I actually almost had this happen to me on the way back from our ride, and I know we talked about it a little bit at the start of the show, so keep your head on a swivel, boys and girls, because it's that time of year where these little Clibbens are out there on the move.
That makes my rib cage hurt.
Dead center. Like that deer had a purpose to take that guy off that bike.
It's almost impossible just how stupid deer are. Like I've had them, they'll be like 100 yards off the side of the road, see my bike and decide they need to be on the other side of the road. I mean, it's constant.
I had one hit me when we were laying out the 304 detour.
Yep, I remember that.
I was coming down off of Hampton Road there. We're going out towards Mark Niggemeyer's house, putting up an arrow at a tree. And I just kind of almost come to a stop. I was just barely rolling, and one jumped off the hillside right into me, knocked me over the hill.
Fur Clibbens.
Oh, you gotta watch out for them fur Clibbens. Deer are out running, like you said. The rut's kind of getting ready to start and hunting season. And they're just moving around. They've got their dark winter coats. They're hard to see now this time of year. It's getting dark. I mean, you gotta watch out for deer, man. I'm just thankful that, for the most part, our deer are the way they are, and we don't live in Australia where you have prison deer. I like to call them over there.
The roos.
The roos, buddy. Yeah. You imagine hitting one of those on your motorcycle?
Yeah. I watched a video of a guy in like one of the cab over engine trucks hit one. that thing had jumped in the air right before he hit it, and it came like through the windshield. Which is like 10 feet off the ground on one of those heavy haul trucks. So that was wild.
I watched a video. It was kind of like that too. This guy he was actually coming back to his house, and he's on this old, dirt road just out in the middle of nowhere in the outback of Australia. And he's driving along, and this kangaroo jumps out in front of him, and he slams on the brakes and comes to a stop. And the thing's just sitting there looking at him, like bouncing on its tail, looking at him like, what? Come on. He honks the horn at it, right? It takes about 5 steps back in the middle of the road, and then it just jumps and has its feet out and drives it right through his windshield and hits the dude in the chest. Like, I can't imagine having something that has that much anger wanting to take you out. And I mean, those things are jacked. They are completely jacked.
I watched a video of a guy. It was a kangaroo attacking his dog. He gets in a fist fight with the kangaroo. I can only assume that that's the Prime Minister of Australia.
Oh, thank God we don't have things like that over here. Well, I think that about wraps up tonight's episode. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening. I think it was a good conversation. It's really cool to see that our industry expand and explode the way it has. And I'm, like I said, looking forward to the future and seeing where manufacturers end up.
Yep, same.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight, and we'll catch you next time.
Yep. Thanks, guys.